The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine gardens of Thornfield Palace as Prince Alexander stood at his office window, watching his youngest son Lucas playing near the ornate fountain. The 8-year-old prince was dressed in his formal attire, a miniature version of the royal uniform, complete with gold braiding and polished buttons. Today was an important day, the annual Children's Charity Gala where young Lucas would make his first official public appearance alongside his father. Alexander smiled as he watched Lucas chase butterflies around the manicured hedges, his innocent laughter echoing through the courtyard. The boy had been looking forward to this event for weeks, practicing his formal bow and memorizing the names of the important guests who would attend. Despite being only 8 years old, Lucas showed remarkable composure and intelligence, qualities that reminded Alexander of himself at that age. The palace was buzzing with activity as staff members prepared for the afternoon's festivities. Caterers moved efficiently through the grand halls, setting up elaborate displays of food and refreshments. The head butler, Mr. Pemberton, supervised every detail with military precision, ensuring that everything met the exacting standards expected at a royal event. Security personnel conducted their final sweeps of the grounds, checking every corner and shadowy alcove where potential threats might hide. Captain Harrison, the head of palace security, approached Alexander's office with purposeful stride. He had served the royal family for over 15 years, earning their trust through his unwavering dedication and sharp instincts. His withered face bore the marks of countless sleepless nights spent protecting the family he had come to care for deeply. Today, however, something in his expression suggested concern. "Your Highness," Captain Harrison said as he entered the office, his voice carrying its usual respectful tone but with an underlying tension that Alexander immediately noticed. "I need to brief you on the security arrangements for today's event." Alexander turned from the window, giving the captain his full attention. The two men had worked together long enough that Alexander could read the subtle signs in Harrison's demeanor. Something was troubling the security chief, though he was clearly trying to maintain his professional composure. "The perimeter is secure," Harrison continued, "and our team has conducted thorough background checks on all staff members and vendors. However, we've received some intelligence that requires additional precautions." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "There have been reports of suspicious individuals asking questions about the palace's security protocols and the family's daily routines." Alexander's expression grew serious. As a father and a public figure, he was constantly aware of the potential dangers that came with his position. The safety of his family was paramount, and he relied heavily on Harrison's expertise to identify and neutralize any threats before they could materialize. "What kind of questions?" Alexander asked, moving away from the window to face the captain directly. "Inquiries about which entrances the family typically uses, the timing of their movements, and particularly detailed questions about Prince Lucas's activities," Harrison explained. "The sources aren't entirely reliable, but, given today's significance, I believe we should implement enhanced security measures." The mention of Lucas's name sent a chill down Alexander's spine. His youngest son was still so innocent, unaware of the darker aspects of their public life. The boy saw only the excitement and pageantry of royal events, not understanding that their every move was scrutinized by both admirers and those who might wish them harm. "I want additional guards assigned specifically to Lucas," Alexander said without hesitation. "And I want someone watching him at all times during the event, even when he's with me." "Already arranged, Your Highness," Harrison replied. "I've selected our most experienced agents for close protection duty. They'll maintain appropriate distance to avoid alarming Prince Lucas, but they'll be ready to respond instantly if needed." Alexander nodded his approval, but his mind was already racing with concerns. How could he balance his son's need for a normal childhood with the harsh realities of their position? Lucas was eager to participate in royal duties, but perhaps he was still too young to be exposed to such public events where unknown dangers might lurk. Outside, Lucas continued his innocent play, completely unaware of the serious conversation taking place in his father's office. He had found a small lizard hiding among the rose bushes and was gently trying to coax it onto his hand, his young face filled with wonder and curiosity. The boy's natural kindness and gentle nature made him beloved by everyone who knew him, but these same qualities also made Alexander fiercely protective. "There's one more thing," Harrison said, his voice dropping slightly.
We've noticed some unusual activity among the service staff.
Nothing concrete, but a few new faces that weren't part of our original security clearance. I've had them thoroughly vetted, but I wanted you to be aware.
This news added another layer of concern to Alexander's growing anxiety.
The palace employed dozens of temporary workers for large events, and, while they all underwent background checks, the sheer number made it impossible to guarantee absolute security. Any one of these individuals could potentially pose a threat, and, with Lucas making his public debut, the stakes were higher than ever. "I trust your judgment, Harrison," Alexander said.
"Do whatever you feel is necessary to keep my family safe."
As the morning progressed, the final preparations for the charity gala continued at a frantic pace. Dignitaries began arriving early, their luxury vehicles forming a procession through the palace gates. Alexander watched from his office as each guest was carefully screened by security before being escorted into the main reception hall. Lucas had been brought inside to prepare for his appearance, his young face glowing with excitement as his personal valet helped him with the final touches of his formal attire. The boy chattered constantly about the important people he would meet and the speeches he had memorized, his enthusiasm infectious despite Alexander's growing concerns about the day's events. The time was approaching when father and son would make their grand entrance together, marking Lucas's official introduction to the world of royal responsibilities. Alexander straightened his own formal uniform and checked his appearance in the mirror, knowing that hundreds of cameras would capture every moment of their appearance together. But, as he prepared to collect his son for their entrance, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go terribly wrong. Captain Harrison's warnings echoed in his mind, and he found himself second-guessing the decision to include Lucas in such a public event. The boy was still so young, so vulnerable, and the thought of exposing him to potential danger filled Alexander with dread. Little did Alexander know that his paternal instincts were about to be put to the ultimate test, and that the afternoon's events would challenge everything he believed about protecting his family while fulfilling his royal duties. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not only his resolve as a father but also his trust in those sworn to protect his family. The grand ballroom of Thornfield Palace had been transformed into a wonderland of elegance and sophistication. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing patterns of light across the polished marble floors, while elaborate floral arrangements added splashes of color throughout the vast space. Tables draped in pristine white linens were adorned with the finest china and silverware, each place setting arranged with mathematical precision. Prince Alexander stood at the entrance to the ballroom, his hand resting gently on Lucas's shoulder as they prepared to make their entrance. The 8-year-old prince looked every inch the royal heir in his miniature formal attire, his hair perfectly combed and his small chest puffed out with pride. Despite Alexander's mounting concerns about security, he couldn't help but feel a surge of paternal pride as he looked down at his son.
"Remember what we practiced," Alexander whispered to Lucas as the herald prepared to announce their arrival.
"Walk slowly, smile at the guests, and wait for my signal before you speak." "Yes, father," Lucas replied, his young voice filled with excitement and determination.
"I won't let you down."
The massive doors swung open, and father and son stepped into the ballroom together. A hush fell over the assembled crowd as hundreds of guests turned to witness this historic moment.
Cameras flashed like distant lightning as photographers captured every angle of the young prince's debut appearance. Alexander guided Lucas through the crowd, stopping frequently to exchange pleasantries with distinguished guests. The boy performed admirably, offering polite bows and remembering the names of important dignitaries just as he had been taught. His natural charm and innocent enthusiasm won over even the most jaded observers, and soon the ballroom buzzed with positive comments about the young prince's poise and character. But, even as Alexander basked in his son's success, he remained acutely aware of Captain Harrison and his security team positioned strategically throughout the ballroom. The captain caught Alexander's eye periodically, offering subtle nods of reassurance, but his vigilant expression never relaxed. Every new face in the crowd was scrutinized, every movement analyzed for potential threats. As the afternoon progressed, Lucas's confidence grew. He began engaging more freely with the guests, his natural curiosity leading him to ask thoughtful questions about their work with various charities. The boy's genuine interest in helping others impressed even the most seasoned philanthropists, and several guests commented to Alexander about Lucas's remarkable maturity for his age.
During a brief lull in their social obligations, Alexander allowed Lucas to visit the refreshment table where an elaborate display of beverages had been arranged. Crystal pitchers filled with fruit-infused water, fresh juices, and sparkling cider created a colorful array that caught the young prince's attention immediately. The boy's eyes lit up as he surveyed the options, his earlier nervousness forgotten in the excitement of the moment.
"May I have some apple cider, father?" Lucas asked politely, pointing to a particularly elegant crystal pitcher filled with golden liquid. "Of course," Alexander replied, signaling to one of the servers to assist his son. "But remember to sip slowly. We still have many people to meet."
A uniformed server approached with a warm smile, carefully pouring the sparkling cider into a child-sized crystal glass. Lucas accepted the drink with proper royal etiquette, thanking the server graciously before taking a small, careful sip. The sweet taste brought an immediate smile to his face, and he turned to share his delight with his father. But Alexander's attention had been drawn away by the approach of Lord Pembroke, the chairman of the charity they were honoring today. The distinguished gentleman wanted to discuss the Foundation's recent achievements and future plans, requiring Alexander's full focus for what he assumed would be a brief conversation. "Your Highness," Lord Pembroke began, his voice filled with gratitude and excitement.
"I cannot thank you enough for allowing Prince Lucas to join us today.
His presence has already generated tremendous enthusiasm among our supporters." Alexander smiled warmly, keeping one eye on Lucas as he spoke with the charity chairman.
"Lucas has been looking forward to this event for weeks.
He's genuinely interested in understanding how we can help children in need." As the two men continued their conversation, Lucas wandered slightly away from the refreshment table, still clutching his crystal glass of cider. The boy was fascinated by the elaborate ice sculptures that decorated the buffet area, and he moved closer to examine the intricate details carved into the frozen displays. His innocent curiosity and natural tendency to explore had led him just far enough from his father to create a moment of vulnerability that would soon prove crucial. Captain Harrison had been conducting a systematic survey of the ballroom when his trained eye caught something that made his blood run cold. Among the servers moving efficiently through the crowd, he spotted a man whose behavior seemed subtly different from the others. While the legitimate staff members moved with purposeful efficiency, this individual appeared to be observing the guests more than serving them. The man was of average height and build, with dark hair and unremarkable features that would make him easily forgettable in a crowd. But Harrison's years of experience had taught him to look beyond surface appearances, and something about this server's movements and positioning triggered his professional instincts. The man seemed to be following a pattern that would bring him into proximity with Prince Lucas, and his eyes held an intensity that didn't match his supposedly casual role. Harrison began moving through the crowd with practiced stealth, maintaining visual contact with the suspicious individual while simultaneously scanning for other potential threats. His earpiece crackled softly with routine communications from other security team members, but he remained focused on the server whose behavior had caught his attention. As Harrison moved closer, he noticed that the man's uniform, while similar to the other servers, showed subtle differences in tailoring and fabric quality. More concerning was the way the man's eyes constantly tracked Prince Lucas's movements, even when the boy was well outside his assigned serving area. The server's hands remained suspiciously empty of the trays and serving utensils that occupied his colleagues, suggesting that his presence among the staff might not be legitimate. The suspicious server began moving more deliberately toward the area where Lucas stood admiring the ice sculptures. Harrison's pulse quickened as he realized the potential danger, and he immediately activated his communication device to alert other team members while simultaneously closing the distance between himself and the threat. "Alpha Team, possible hostile approaching Prince Lucas," Harrison spoke quietly into his microphone, using code words that wouldn't alarm the civilian guests. "Moving to intercept." But even as Harrison responded to the threat, he noticed something else that sent alarm bells ringing through his mind. The crystal glass in Lucas's hand, the same glass that had been filled moments earlier by one of the servers, seemed to have attracted unusual attention from several individuals positioned around the refreshment area. Their focused observation of the young prince's drink suggested a coordination that went far beyond casual interest. Harrison's mind raced as he processed the implications. If the threat wasn't just one suspicious individual but part of a coordinated effort involving multiple people, then
the danger to Prince Lucas was far greater than anyone had anticipated. The captain's training kicked into overdrive as he realized that what he had initially perceived as a possible security breach might actually be the first stages of a carefully orchestrated attack on the royal family. The ballroom continued to buzz with pleasant conversation and the gentle clinking of crystal glasses, but beneath the surface of civilized celebration, a deadly game of cat and mouse was beginning to unfold. Harrison found himself racing against time to identify and neutralize a threat whose full scope remained frighteningly unclear. As Lucas raised his glass to take another sip of the golden cider, completely unaware of the danger swirling around him, Harrison made a split-second decision that would change the course of the afternoon's events. The captain abandoned all pretense of subtlety and began pushing through the crowd with urgent determination, knowing that every second might mean the difference between safety and catastrophe for the young prince he had sworn to protect. Captain Harrison's heart hammered against his ribs as he pushed through the elegantly dressed crowd, his eyes locked on Prince Lucas, who stood innocently by the ice sculptures, the crystal glass poised at his lips. The suspicious server had disappeared into the throng of people, but Harrison's trained instincts screamed that the immediate danger lay not with the man himself, but with what he might have already accomplished. Years of protecting the royal family had taught Harrison to trust his gut feelings, and right now every fiber of his being was telling him that something was terribly wrong with that glass of cider. The coordinated attention it had received, the timing of the suspicious server's presence, and the subtle wrongness he had detected in the man's behavior all pointed to one horrifying conclusion. "Your Highness!" Harrison called out, his voice cutting through the polite murmur of conversation like a blade. His urgent tone immediately caught the attention of nearby guests, who turned in surprise at the security chief's obvious distress. Lucas looked up from his examination of the ice sculptures, his young face brightening as he recognized the familiar figure of Captain Harrison approaching. The boy had always liked the kind security chief who sometimes told him stories about his adventures in the military before joining the palace staff. "Captain Harrison," Lucas said cheerfully, raising his glass in greeting. "Look at these beautiful sculptures. Did you know they carved this swan from a single block of ice?" But Harrison's expression was grim as he closed the remaining distance between them. His years of experience had taught him to make split-second decisions in life-threatening situations, and every instinct he possessed was screaming that the glass in Lucas's hand represented imminent danger. "Prince Lucas, I need you to put that glass down immediately," Harrison said, his voice firm but controlled, trying not to panic the child while conveying the absolute necessity of compliance. The 8-year-old prince looked confused by the serious tone and urgent request. He had been enjoying the sweet cider and couldn't understand why the captain would want him to stop drinking it. His innocent confusion was written clearly across his young features as he hesitated, the glass still in his small hand. "But father said I could have it," Lucas protested gently, his natural obedience warring with his confusion about the sudden change in circumstances. "It tastes really good, and I was being careful not to spill any." Harrison realized that he had perhaps seconds to act before Lucas took another sip of what he strongly suspected was a contaminated beverage. The captain had seen too many assassination attempts in his career to ignore the warning signs, and the potential consequences of being wrong were far less severe than the potential consequences of being right and failing to act. Across the ballroom, Prince Alexander was still engaged in conversation with Lord Pembroke, but something in the change of atmosphere had begun to penetrate his consciousness. The subtle shift in energy that occurs when trained security personnel go on high alert was something he had learned to recognize over years of living with constant protection. Alexander excused himself from the conversation and turned to locate his son, his parental instincts suddenly on high alert. What he saw made his blood freeze in his veins. Captain Harrison was approaching Lucas with obvious urgency, and the boy was holding his glass of cider with innocent confusion written across his face. Without hesitation, Alexander began moving through the crowd toward his son, his own security training from years of military service kicking in as he recognized the signs of a potential crisis. The prince's movement caught the attention of other security personnel, who immediately began converging on the area where Lucas stood. "Lucas, put the glass down now." Alexander's voice boomed across the ballroom as he pushed through the crowd with desperate urgency. The authority and fear in his father's voice finally penetrated Lucas's confusion. The boy had never heard that particular tone from his father before, and it frightened him more than any explanation could have.
His small fingers released their grip on the crystal glass, but, in his startled reaction, he fumbled the handoff. The crystal glass tumbled through the air, its contents splashing outward in a golden arc that caught the light from the chandeliers above. Time seemed to slow as Harrison lunged forward, desperately trying to catch the falling glass before it could shatter on the marble floor and, potentially contaminate the surrounding area. Alexander reached his son at the same moment, sweeping the boy away from the falling glass and the spreading liquid. His strong arms encircled Lucas protectively, shielding him from whatever danger the cider might represent. The prince's paternal instincts had overridden all other considerations as he focused solely on protecting his child. The crystal glass struck the marble floor with a sharp crash, sending fragments of glass and droplets of golden liquid across the immediate area. Several guests stepped back in alarm, their elegant evening were now spotted with the mysterious beverage that had caused such urgent concern among the royal security team. Harrison immediately activated his communication device, calling for the palace medical team and hazardous materials specialists. Code red, possible contamination in the main ballroom. I need hazmat and medical personnel immediately. The urgency in Harrison's voice sent ripples of alarm through the nearby guests, who began to realize that what they had initially assumed was a simple accident might actually be something far more serious. Murmurs of concern began spreading through the crowd as people noticed the intense activity of the security personnel. "What's happening?" Lucas asked, his young voice trembling as he looked up at his father. The boy could see the fear and anger in Alexander's eyes, emotions that he rarely witnessed in his normally composed father. "Everything is going to be fine," Alexander said, his voice carefully controlled despite the rage and terror warring within him. "Captain Harrison is just being extra careful to make sure you're safe." But Alexander's calm words belied the fury building inside him. Someone had potentially tried to poison his 8-year-old son at what should have been a joyous celebration of charitable giving. The thought that anyone could target an innocent child filled him with a protective rage that threatened to overwhelm his royal composure. Harrison knelt beside the shattered glass, carefully avoiding the scattered liquid as he examined the residue. Even from a distance, he could detect a faint chemical odor that didn't belong in any legitimate beverage. His worst fears were being confirmed with each passing second. "Your Highness, we need to evacuate Prince Lucas immediately," Harrison said, rising to his feet with grim determination. "The medical team will want to examine him as a precaution, and we need to secure this entire area until we can determine exactly what we're dealing with." The realization that his suspicions had been correct filled Harrison with both relief and anger. Relief that he had acted quickly enough to prevent Lucas from consuming more of the contaminated beverage, and anger that someone had managed to penetrate their security measures so completely. As medical personnel rushed into the ballroom carrying emergency equipment, the elegant charity gala began transforming into something resembling a crime scene. Guests were being quietly evacuated from the immediate area while forensics experts prepared to analyze the spilled liquid and shattered glass. Alexander lifted his son into his arms, holding him close as they were escorted from the ballroom by a phalanx of security personnel. Lucas clung to his father, finally, beginning to understand that something serious and dangerous had just occurred, though he couldn't comprehend the full scope of what had been attempted. "Father, was someone trying to hurt me?" Lucas asked in a small voice as they moved through the palace corridors toward the secure medical facility. Alexander's jaw tightened as he considered how to answer his son's innocent question. How could he explain to an 8-year-old that there were people in the world who might want to harm him simply because of who he was? How could he balance honesty with the need to preserve his child's sense of security and innocence? "Captain Harrison thought there might be something wrong with your drink," Alexander said carefully. "He was just making sure you stayed safe, which is his job." But, even as he tried to reassure his son, Alexander's mind was racing with questions and demands for answers. Who had orchestrated this attack? How had they managed to penetrate the palace's security measures? And, most importantly, how could he ensure that such a thing never happened again? The secure medical wing of Thornfield Palace had been transformed into a hub of urgent activity as specialists conducted thorough examinations of Prince Lucas. The 8-year-old sat patiently on the examination table, still wearing his formal attire but now looking small and vulnerable under the bright medical lights. Despite his confusion about the day's events, Lucas maintained the composed demeanor he had been taught, though his eyes reflected the fear and uncertainty that any child would feel in such circumstances. Dr. Elizabeth Crawford, the royal family's personal physician, worked with quiet efficiency as she monitored Lucas's vital signs and conducted preliminary tests. Her years of experience treating the royal family had prepared her for many situations, but the possibility of a poisoning attempt against a child still filled her with professional urgency and personal outrage. His pulse and blood pressure are normal, Dr. Crawford reported to Prince Alexander, who paced anxiously nearby. There are no immediate signs of distress or toxicity, which suggests that either the substance wasn't as dangerous as we feared, or Captain Harrison's quick action prevented significant exposure. Alexander nodded grimly, but his relief at Lucas's apparent good health was overshadowed by the rage building within him. Someone had targeted his child, his innocent, 8-year-old son who had done nothing more than want to participate in a charity event to help other children. The violation of that trust and safety felt like a physical blow to Alexander's heart. Captain Harrison entered the medical wing with a tablet computer in hand, his expression grave as he prepared to brief the prince on the preliminary findings. The security chief's face showed the strain of the afternoon's events, and his usual composed demeanor was cracked by barely contained anger at the security breach that had occurred on his watch. "Your Highness, we have initial results from the forensics team," Harrison reported, his voice tight with controlled fury. The liquid contained a fast-acting sedative compound, not lethal in the amount that was in the glass, but sufficient to cause unconsciousness within minutes of consumption. The confirmation of Harrison's suspicions hit Alexander like a physical blow. Someone hadn't just wanted to harm his son, they had wanted to incapacitate him, presumably as a prelude to kidnapping or worse. The calculated nature of the attack made it even more horrifying than a random act of violence would have been. "How much did he drink?" Alexander demanded, his royal composure beginning to crack under the pressure of parental terror and fury. "Based on the amount recovered from the glass and the spillage pattern, we estimate less than 2 sips, Harrison replied. Dr. Crawford's examinations confirmed that Prince Lucas shows no signs of sedation or other adverse effects. Lucas looked between the adults with growing comprehension that something very serious had happened. The boy's natural intelligence had been picking up fragments of the conversation, and, while he didn't understand all the implications, he was beginning to realize that someone had put something bad in his drink. "Father," Lucas said quietly, his young voice carrying a maturity that no 8-year-old should have to display, "did someone try to make me sick?" Alexander's heart broke at the innocence in his son's question and the trust that still shone in the boy's eyes despite everything that had happened. How could he explain that there were people who might want to hurt him not for anything he had done, but simply because of who he was and what he represented? "Yes, son," Alexander said, kneeling beside the examination table and taking Lucas's small hand in his own. "Someone put something in your drink that could have made you very sick. But Captain Harrison caught it before you could drink very much, so you're going to be perfectly fine." The simple honesty of his father's explanation seemed to help Lucas process what had occurred. The boy nodded solemnly, his trust in his father's protection evident even in the face of this frightening revelation about the dangers that surrounded their family. "Will you catch the person who did it?" Lucas asked, looking between his father and Captain Harrison with the absolute faith that children place in the adults they trust to protect them. "We're going to find everyone involved," Alexander promised, and the steel in his voice made it clear that this was not merely a comforting platitude but a solemn vow. Harrison cleared his throat and consulted his tablet again. "We've identified the server who we believe administered the substance. His credentials were forged, and he disappeared from the ballroom immediately after the incident. However, we have security footage and several witnesses who got a good look at him." "What about the other staff members you suspected?" Alexander asked, his mind already moving toward ensuring that every aspect of this security breach was thoroughly investigated. "We're conducting interviews with every person who had access to the refreshment area," Harrison replied. "So far, we've identified at least 2 other individuals whose backgrounds don't match their supposed employment records. This appears to have been a coordinated effort involving multiple infiltrators." The revelation that the attack had been orchestrated by multiple people rather than a single individual made Alexander's blood run cold. This wasn't the work of a deranged individual acting alone, but rather a planned operation that had required significant resources and coordination. The implications for his family's security were staggering. Dr. Crawford completed her examination and approached the prince with her findings. "I want to keep Prince Lucas under observation for a few more hours as a precaution, but all indications are that he's going to be perfectly fine. The amount he consumed was minimal, and his body is showing no signs of distress." Alexander felt a wave of relief wash over him, but it was immediately followed by a surge of rage so intense that he had to grip the edge of the examination table to steady himself. His son was safe, but only because of Captain Harrison's vigilance and quick thinking. If the security chief had been even slightly less observant or had hesitated for even a few more seconds, the outcome could have been catastrophic. "I want every person who was involved in this caught and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law," Alexander said, his voice carrying the full authority of his position. "And I want a complete review of our security protocols to determine how this breach was possible." "Already in progress, Your Highness," Harrison assured him. "I've requested additional personnel from the National Security Service, and we're implementing enhanced protection measures for the entire family effective immediately." But even as plans were made for increased security and the hunt for the perpetrators began in earnest, Alexander found himself grappling with questions that went beyond immediate safety concerns. How could he continue to allow his children to participate in public events when such participation exposed them to these kinds of risks? How could he balance their need for normal childhood experiences with the harsh realities of their position? Lucas, meanwhile, had been listening to the adult conversation with the focused attention that intelligent children often display when they sense that important decisions are being made about their lives. Despite his young age, he seemed to understand that this incident would likely change many aspects of his daily routine and public appearances. "Father," Lucas said thoughtfully, "does this mean I won't be able to help with charity events anymore?" The question cut straight to the heart of Alexander's internal struggle. His son's genuine desire to help others and participate in the family's charitable work was one of the things that made him most proud as a father. But how could he risk exposing Lucas to further attempts at harm simply to maintain appearances or fulfill public expectations? "We'll figure out ways for you to help that are safer," Alexander promised, though he wasn't entirely sure how such a thing would be possible given the level of threat that had just been revealed. As the medical team continued their monitoring and the security investigation expanded throughout the palace, Alexander made a silent vow that would drive his actions in the days and weeks to come. Whoever had orchestrated this attack on his family would face consequences that would serve as a deterrent to anyone else who might consider threatening his children. The elegant charity gala had ended in chaos and fear, but, from that chaos, a steely determination was emerging that would reshape how the royal family approached public engagement and personal security. The innocence of childhood had been violated, but it would not be destroyed, not if Alexander had anything to say about it. 3 hours had passed since the incident at the charity gala, and the secure conference room deep within Thornfield Palace had become the nerve center for the most intensive security investigation in the palace's modern history. Prince Alexander sat at the head of the polished oak table, his formal attire from the afternoon's event now rumpled and his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of the stress he had endured. Captain Harrison stood before a large display screen showing surveillance footage, security reports, and photographs of the suspects who had infiltrated the palace staff. His presentation was thorough and methodical, but the underlying anger in his voice was unmistakable as he detailed the scope of the security breach. "We've identified a total of 4 individuals who gained access to the palace using forged credentials," Harrison reported, clicking through images of the suspects. "Their coordination suggests professional training and significant advance planning. This wasn't an opportunistic attack, it was a carefully orchestrated operation." Alexander studied the faces on the screen with cold intensity. These were the people who had violated his family's sanctuary, who had targeted his innocent child for reasons he was only beginning to understand. Each face was now burned into his memory with the clarity that comes from both fury and paternal protectiveness. "What do we know about their backgrounds?" Alexander asked, his voice carrying the controlled tone he used when his anger threatened to overwhelm his royal training. "Preliminary investigation suggests they're associated with a radical group that opposes the monarchy's charitable initiatives," Harrison explained. Intelligence services believe they may have been attempting to kidnap Prince Lucas to use as leverage in negotiations over government funding for social programs.
The political motivation behind the attack made it somehow worse in Alexander's mind.
His son had been targeted not for anything he had done, but as a pawn in someone else's ideological agenda. The thought that political extremists would use an 8-year-old child to advance their cause filled him with a rage that burned cold and steady. Dr. Crawford entered the conference room with her final medical report, her professional demeanor masking the personal outrage she felt at the attack on Lucas. Prince Lucas is completely clear of any toxins, and there are no lasting effects from his minimal exposure to the sedative. He's asking when he can return to his normal activities. That's going to depend on what we determine about ongoing security risks, Alexander replied. I won't risk exposing him to further attempts until we've identified and neutralized everyone involved in this conspiracy. The reality of their new situation was beginning to settle over Alexander like a heavy cloak. The carefree days of his son's childhood were effectively over, replaced by a constant awareness of threats and the need for enhanced security measures that would inevitably restrict Lucas's freedom and normal development. A sharp knock at the conference room door interrupted the meeting, and Alexander's private secretary entered with obvious urgency. Your Highness, we've just received word that 2 of the suspects have been apprehended attempting to leave the country. They're being brought back for questioning. The news brought Alexander a grim satisfaction, but he knew that capturing the perpetrators was only the beginning of ensuring his family's long-term safety. The existence of organized groups willing to target royal children meant that this incident might be just the first of many potential threats they would need to address. I want to be present during their interrogation, Alexander said, rising from his chair with determined purpose. Your Highness, Harrison interjected carefully, that might not be advisable. These individuals are dangerous, and your presence could complicate the legal proceedings. But Alexander's expression brooked no argument. Someone tried to drug my 8-year-old son at what should have been a celebration of helping children in need. I want to look them in the eye and understand exactly what kind of people would do such a thing. The drive to the secure facility where the suspects were being held gave Alexander time to process the full implications of the day's events. The attack on Lucas had shattered his assumptions about their family's safety and forced him to confront realities he had hoped his children would never need to face. When Alexander entered the interrogation observation room, he could see the 2 captured suspects through a one-way mirror. They appeared ordinary, unremarkable individuals who could blend into any crowd, which made their actions all the more chilling. These weren't obviously dangerous criminals, but rather people who had made calculated decisions to harm an innocent child for political purposes. The lead investigator began his questioning with professional thoroughness, and slowly the full scope of the conspiracy began to emerge. The group had been planning the operation for months, studying the palace's security procedures and identifying potential vulnerabilities. They had specifically targeted Lucas because of his age and public appeal, believing that harming a child would generate maximum publicity for their cause. As Alexander listened to the cold, calculated way the suspects discussed their plans to drug and kidnap his son, his hands clenched into fists and his jaw tightened with barely controlled rage. These people had viewed Lucas not as a human being, not as a child deserving of protection, but as an object to be used in their political games. The interrogation revealed that the immediate threat had been neutralized with the capture of the 4 infiltrators, but it also confirmed that the group they represented remained active and potentially dangerous. Alexander realized that the enhanced security measures Harrison had implemented would need to become permanent features of his family's daily life. When the interrogation session ended, Alexander returned to the palace with a heavy heart but also with a steely resolve that would reshape his approach to protecting his family. The innocence of the morning seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the harsh awareness of the lengths to which some people would go to advance their political agendas. Lucas was waiting in the family's private quarters when Alexander returned, having been told that his father was handling some important business related to the afternoon's incident. The boy looked small in his pajamas, his earlier formal attire replaced by the comfortable clothes of childhood, but his eyes held a new awareness that hadn't been there that morning. Father, are the bad people caught? Lucas asked with the direct honesty that children use when they want real answers rather than comforting lies. Alexander sat beside his son and pulled him close, feeling the need to offer both truth and reassurance.
Some of them are caught, and the others will be found. But, more importantly, we're going to make sure that nothing like this can ever happen to you again. Will I still be able to help with charity work?
Lucas asked, and the question revealed his remarkable resilience and continued desire to help others despite the trauma he had experienced.
Alexander considered his answer carefully.
The easy path would be to withdraw from public engagement entirely, to keep his family safe behind palace walls and security barriers. But such an approach would mean letting the terrorists achieve their goal of disrupting the royal family's charitable mission.
We'll find new ways for you to help that are safer, Alexander promised.
The people who tried to hurt you wanted to stop us from helping children who need our support.
We're not going to let them succeed.
That evening, as Alexander tucked his son into bed, he reflected on how much had changed in the span of a single afternoon. The attack had revealed vulnerabilities in their security and forced difficult decisions about the balance between public service and family safety. But it had also demonstrated the strength of the bonds that held his family together and the dedication of those sworn to protect them. Captain Harrison's quick thinking had prevented a tragedy, and the investigation that followed had exposed a broader conspiracy that might have claimed other victims if left unchecked. The price had been the end of Lucas's childhood innocence, but perhaps that was inevitable given the realities of their position. As Alexander finally allowed himself to rest, he carried with him the knowledge that his family's world had been forever changed by the events of the day. The fury he had felt at seeing his son threatened had crystallized into a determination to ensure that such a violation of their safety and trust would never happen again. The reckoning for those responsible was just beginning, but, more importantly, the work of rebuilding their sense of security and purpose would continue in the days ahead. The charity gala that was meant to celebrate helping children had instead become a reminder of the precious vulnerability of childhood and the lengths to which a father would go to protect his own child. But, from that crisis had emerged a stronger resolve to continue their mission of service, albeit with the hard-won wisdom that came from facing real danger and surviving it together.